It wasn't the thing my parents wanted me to be good at. You know, you're working class and your parents have never owned their own house, never owned a car and stuff. They think you go to university to get a trade, to get a profession. So accountant, lawyer, dentist, doctor. There was one relative, the aunt of mine, who had grown up with my mum in Bradford, was married to an accountant. And he always had a nice flash car. They owned their own home, seemed to have a very good standard of living. So I thought, well, I'll become an accountant. So by the age of sort of 15 or 16, that's what I thought I was going to do. And I was doing economics and accounts. And then there was this sort of epiphany. I was 17, I just sat my hires and I'd scraped a C for economics, just past economics. And I thought, why the hell am I going to university to do a subject I'm really not that interested in and obviously not that good at? The thing I really like is English. I like books. I knew very few professional writers who made a living out of their writing. So, you know, there, at uni I was thinking, oh, I'm going to have to become a teacher or hopefully an English lecturer, a lecturer at university. And I will continue to write as a hobby part-time. In the margins of my life, I'll be a writer.
I never read romantic novels, ever. I didn't enjoy them. And that's it. I never liked fantasy and I've never liked science fiction. I suppose that sort of leaves for one's comfort reading the detective story. The form is often not quite nostalgic. I mean, if you're reading some of the earlier ones, it's a different world. It's a more ordered world. It's a safer world, despite the fact they're dealing with murder. You're back in this English village with the well-known characters. There's a sense of nostalgia and security about them. And in the end, a terrible crime is solved and peace and order is restored. And in real life it isn't. And in modern detective stories, especially mine, it isn't restored. But in most classical detective stories, it is restored. You know it's going to turn out right, that virtue is going to be rewarded and evil is going to be punished. So they do have that ability to provide for the reader some kind of solace, I think, both for those who write them, possibly, and certainly for those who read them. I don't think we choose our genre. I think the genre chooses us. I think the need to feel in control is very strong in me. The idea that you would lose control has always horrified me, really. And I suppose this is a very controlled form of writing.
I came up into the yard one night, must have been about 1980, to read to the kids. And the school from Birmingham. And I came into the yard to read on a November evening. It was dark. And as I came to the yard, there was all just a stable light on. And I was just about to come within the light of that. And I heard this voice, this little boy talking. And I recognised who he was, a boy called Billy. And Billy, I had been told by the teacher when they got off the bus, was a very sad child, a very nervous child, who had been fostered often, and very anxious, so anxious that he wouldn't speak. He'd had a problem about speaking. On his record, it showed that he'd had a stammer, and that how he dealt with the stammer was that he didn't talk, finish. And the teacher told me, whatever you do, Michael, please don't point your finger at him and ask him a question, because he will do a runner. And he's done it from school a lot. He gets terrified because it means someone's making a demand upon him to speak and respond, and he won't, he'll run off. So please don't ask him direct questions like you do. So I didn't. And I watched him all week, and he was very isolated from the other kids. You could see very fragile, but loving the farming and loving the connection, the contact with the animals. I could see that very much on his own, and I hardly addressed a word to him all week because I didn't want to frighten him. Anyway, there I was, came up on Thursday evening, and there was Billy standing in his slippers under the stable yard, stroking the horse and talking, 19 to the dozen, you know, words just pouring out of his mouth. So I listened for a bit, and he was telling the horse all about what he'd done on the farm that day. So I went round through the vegetable garden, down back through the house, and I got the teacher. And we came round and we stood there in the shadows, out of his sight, and listened to him, talking. The teachers, like myself, were completely amazed at how this flow was happening. And of course, we knew what it was. We knew it was all to do with, you know, this horse isn't going to judge me, this horse isn't going to tease me. I can say what I like. He'd been released. And I was thinking about that the next day and thinking there's something very special about that moment, about the connection between two creatures of different species. And then I knew what it was that was special. It wasn't necessarily just that the boy felt relaxed enough to talk. It was the other thing, and the other thing was that the horse was listening, which sounds stupid. Of course the horse didn't understand every word, but I'm quite convinced that the horse had a sympathy for that child. For a start, the horse stayed there. It wasn't being fed. Ears were pricking back and forth and back and forth. That horse was listening to the tone, the body language, everything. And so I thought, well, you know, I can maybe do this. Maybe you can write a story and make it work, where the horse is the teller of it.
The way things are today, you couldn't be as successful in the sense of have your works put on and esteemed as Shakespeare was, and be completely unknown to everybody as Shakespeare was in his time. I mean, if he were alive today, he'd be on everything. Every morning he'd be on the Today program. He'd be having special sessions at the South Bank. He'd be painted in 1,000 different pictures, and he'd be interviewed, and he couldn't avoid it.
I don't write for readers. I don't think many writers do. I don't think any. They say they do, don't they? But, well, I only write for myself. Maybe when somebody says, oh, your book has given me so much pleasure, I just think how peculiar, you know. Don't know what to say. Of course, I don't say that. I smile and say how nice, but I think I'd have written books whether they were published or not. I just liked writing.